Thank you for joining me today. For those who have not met me yet, virtually or physically, I'm Ron Levine from Mindfulness in Blue Jeans. I stumbled ass backwards into mindfulness and insight meditation in 1998 during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression, which had blown up into full-blown agoraphobia because of a raging panic disorder that I'd been denying and suppressing for almost 10 years. And I was introduced to a psychologist who at that point was already several decades deep into practicing and teaching mindfulness and insight meditation, decades before it became, the flavor of the month. He offered this to me as a way of dealing with my issues, and I was underwhelmed by the suggestion. My feeling was, well, I can't even go past my front door without having a meltdown, let alone be able, I was on disability, I couldn't work, my life had effectively stopped. And here's this guy saying, all right, let's sit and watch the breathing for a while. Great. Okay. I didn't have anything else, and I was sitting at home all day anyway. So I decided to try it just long enough so I could go back to him and say, look, dude, this didn't work. Can I have the real treatment now? And that was April of 1998. And I haven't had that conversation with him yet. And now I'm teaching this stuff. So there may be something to it. When I started putting together my thoughts for today's talk, I really came back to those early days of my practice. Two of the very early insights that I had really centered around what we're talking about today. My way of being able to start getting back out into the world, past the front door, literally started with a walk around the block. I just walked around the block of the apartment that me and my then girlfriend were living in at the time. It was terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. It's just a typical residential block here in Waltham, Massachusetts. Not any big thing. I was back inside the apartment probably within a minute. That short of a walk. And that was how I started. And I slowly had to branch out into, okay, now I'm going to walk a block and a half and 2 blocks and so forth. What was really difficult at this time was it felt so hopeless. This was really such a drop in the bucket of what was required. I'm thinking to myself, I need to be able to work. I need to be able to be out of the house for, 8-10 hours at a time and out, further than a block from my house. And there were a lot of times when I thought to myself, what's the point? What is a walk around the block? What is a walk around 2 blocks going to get me? And one of the insights that came to me at that time was something that I started calling CTA, consider the alternative. My alternatives here were I can walk around the block or I can not walk around the block. Walking around the block feels kind of hopeless. Not walking around the block, definitely hopeless. Only one had the possibility to help, as minuscule as it might have seemed at the time. So I think to myself, however hopeless it felt to do this walk, consider the alternative. Well, what's the alternative? Not walking. All right, let's just fucking walk then. Right? And dovetailing with that CTA mindset was a similar insight, which was don't let the lack of an ideal option prevent you from choosing the best one available. So the ideal option, of course, was, hey, I don't have panic anymore. I don't have anxiety anymore. I don't have depression. I can just go. Well, no, that option wasn't quite on the table. Didn't have that one. But I did have an option. I could go do my walk. So it was important not to get hung up on the lack of the ideal option and being paralyzed by that. What are my alternatives? What are my choices? Now, there come times when we don't have a choice about some kind of pain or discomfort in our lives. at those times, our only real alternatives are holding space for it or not. Those are the choices on the table. There's an old saying that you either make time to be healthy now or you're going to have to make time to be sick later. And what is healthy in this case, when our alternatives are either hold space for something or don't? And it's going to be there either way, by the way. Whether we make the choice to hold space or not. What is healthy in this case may not align with being comfortable. As the psychologist who got me started on the practice once said in a group session that I attended of his, I've always remembered this. Sometimes comfort isn't what's required. And I would go further and say sometimes comfort just isn't possible. Again, it's not one of the options on the table. But we're not really very good at holding space for discomfort, for pain, sometimes, right? And why is this? For one thing, we're taught not to inquire about certain things. Who's ever ended up in one of those conversations with a 5-year-old who says, "What's that? What's that? What's that? What's that? Why? Why?" And then you answer why. Well, why that? And then you answer, well, why that? And it just keeps going. And what do we eventually get to? Stop that. Stop that. Because adults, we don't want to deal with that. Maybe we don't have the time. Maybe it's forcing us to face something that we don't want to. We learn to stop poking at those things. And more than that, we're taught to not really allow unpleasantness. When we feel some kind of discomfort as a child and have some sort of expression of that, crying, screaming, whatever, nobody really comes and says, what are you feeling? Can you describe what you're feeling right now? What is this pain like? Does anybody say? No, not really. Not unless you end up getting taken to the doctor they're trying to diagnose, right? There's this tendency taught to us, again, from an adult who perhaps is, legitimately concerned, legitimately trying to help, good intentions. Or perhaps some people simply don't want to deal with it. But there's this tendency to try to solve the issue immediately, whether it's, stop crying. Or we immediately start, throwing shit against the wall and just being like, okay, does this stop it? Does this stop it? Does this stop it? And it just becomes about stopping whatever it is, to the point where there's a shoot first and ask questions later mindset about it. Which is kind of a funny twist on what I was saying a second ago about nobody really asks what it's like, right? So even when we're willing to maybe ask what it's like, well, we're not going to do that till we make sure the thing is gone. Okay. Once it's gone, then we can assess what happened. What? We're going to try and sort it out after we've got rid of it? Okay. So we're not really taught to explore these things. And then we wonder why, as adults, when we're confronted with situations where removing pain and discomfort is not one of the options on the table, and we wonder why our skills are lacking in this area. Why is this completely throwing me off the rails? Well, why wouldn't it? Of course it's going to. Another thing is that because of the way that we are taught to deal with pain, and by the way, we're more than happy to go along with those teachings. of get rid of it as fast as possible because that's what we want, right? I mean, we're not complaining about trying to get rid of the pain. We want the same thing. No, let's just get the hell rid of it. No, I just don't want to feel it. So what ends up happening is because any kind of pain or discomfort is immediately shunned, immediately battled, we don't get the opportunity to learn how to differentiate between pain that signals an actual safety issue, which is what pain is for, to let us know, oh, hey, there's a mortal danger here. You need to change something. Okay. We don't learn how to differentiate between the pain that signals an actual safety issue and the discomfort that simply comes with growth or with processing difficult feelings and experiences, which, by the way, is a form of growth. So if we wanted to call those good and bad kinds of pain, which of course they're not, even the bad pain has a purpose. It's not bad. But we take the kind of pain that indicates a safety issue, and we take the kind of pain that indicates, hey, something needs to be processed here. We take both of them. We make no distinction. No, it's uncomfortable. Get it out. And then, like I say, we end up in situations sometimes when get it out's not an option. Our ideal option is not on the table. And this applies at physical and psychological levels, which are usually intertwined, right? For example, I usually, when I'm talking about discomfort, because of my background historically has a lot more psychological discomfort than physical discomfort. Some of you listening to me right now are going to be on the exact opposite side of the fence. But to take an example from my past, not a specific, just a general sort of example, going with the psychological discomfort. Psychological unpleasantness almost invariably comes from some kind of fear when we dig down deep enough. And fear, as I like to say, is in the future. We fear what we think we might feel in a future circumstance. Get that mental picture of something that makes us a little nervous. And, oh, am I going to be okay? Will it be overwhelming? Am I going to be in danger? Are people going to laugh at me? All those things that come up. That's in the future. Now, we can feel some very unpleasant things in the present as some painful things might be happening. But fear requires imagination. Fear really requires that imagining of the future, even if it's just a couple of seconds out. It doesn't have to be years. But our autonomic reaction, the subconscious mind and body, which don't know that we're spinning a storyline that's generating fear. They think this is real. Our subconscious mind and body doesn't differentiate between what's actually happening and what we're imagining is happening. It's taking both of them as, oh, this is what's up. Okay, these are the signals that the mind is sending. So even though the fear is coming from picturing a future, the physical reaction is now. And that perpetuates the mind-body cycle. Because not only is the physical reaction now confirming for our subconscious mind that there really is an issue, right? We've really created a mental and physical issue out of nothing at this point. Not only does it perpetuate that cycle, but now we've added a layer of physical discomfort. These are not pleasant sensations that come up in the course of fear. I don't think most of us like what we feel in our stomachs, what we feel in our chest, what we feel in our head when we're experiencing fearful thoughts and storylines. So we have now added physical discomfort to the mental discomfort. And here's the thing. Here's the real bitch of the situation in this scenario. We then approach that physical discomfort using the same dysfunctional strategies that caused them in the first place. By approaching our psychological discomfort in a way that was not skillful, we have now generated physical discomfort on top of it. And of course, the way we approach discomfort in one realm, we're going to approach discomfort in another realm. So we just try and do the same technique with that, which again, just compounds the problem. So it's no wonder that so many of us don't know what the hell we're doing when we eventually find ourselves confronted with this situation when, you know what, the only options are hold space or not. And then the question becomes, well, shit. Okay. I see it now. Fair enough. How do I hold space then? And this is what I'd like to do some practice with today. The techniques that I'm going to present are really designed to be ways to approach, as the Buddha might say, a middle path between, on the one hand, trying to force control, which is something that I was doing for many, many years when I was trying to suppress my panic. I was trying to force it away. And of course, we very often try to mentally force control over things external to us over which we don't have control. So we're trying to find a middle path between that forcing of control and, on the other hand, losing control, whether it's a meltdown or lashing out or what have you. These are two opposite ends of a continuum, and there's a middle way here. And there are skillful techniques to develop that middle path. And what I'd like to do in today's sitting is present several of the ones that I've used over the years that I have found helpful and still use today. I am not immune from pain and discomfort, my friends. I'm a student of this game just like you. So I still use these on a daily basis for myself. And I hope that maybe they'll help some of you as well. So let's sit for a bit. The one cue that I like to give before we get started is, if you are seated, make sure your hips are elevated higher than your knees if possible. It's better for your posture as well as your breathing. If that is not possible right now, no problem. Something to keep in mind for the future. And I invite you to begin the way that I open most of my guided sittings, and simply imagine that you are suspended from the ceiling by a string attached to the top of your head. It's a nice cue for sitting up straight without adding any extra tension. If there's tension in the body right now, that is absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. The same way we don't want to try to suppress our feelings and experiences, perhaps our discomfort, we also don't need to suppress our tension, because what is that doing? It's adding tension to tension. You can't force relaxation. So the very first thing that we might hold space for here is whatever tension we might notice in the body. And how are we going to do that? Let's start with our breathing. Take notice of the breathing. Now, in this practice, what I teach, we don't try to shape the breathing. We don't try to control the breathing. Our meditative breath is simply the breath that is happening right now as we're meditating. It doesn't matter if it's long or short, deep or shallow. And if it helps you to know, my breath is normally pretty damn shallow. And that's fine. So let's start by simply noticing the breathing exactly as it is. And if we notice that we are trying to shape and control the breathing because we've been doing it for years or decades and we're not really sure how not to, then fine. Notice that. Oh, there's some shaping and controlling happening here that I either am not sure how to stop, or you know what, right now, I don't want to stop. Great. Whatever the situation is for you and your breathing right now, notice exactly as it is. And if your mind begins to wander, which it does for all of us, just bring the attention back to the breathing, exactly as it is. This is holding space for the breathing. Simply bringing attention to it can be enough. You may find that bringing attention to it changes the experience. Positively, negatively, or maybe it doesn't. And what matters the most right now is simply bringing attention to that. Holding space isn't always an easy process, but it's not a complicated process. It's really just practicing the same simple thing over and over again. Now, I mentioned that this would be a way to perhaps hold space for some tension in the body. If you are feeling some tension in the body, you might stay anchored on the breathing and begin to expand the attention a little bit to wherever that tension might reside. And doing so in exactly the same way as with the breathing. Not trying to change it. And if you notice that you're so habituated to trying to change it that you're not sure how not to try to change it, then you just notice that. And if you're not feeling any tension right now, or if you don't feel ready to approach feeling tension right now, stay with the breathing. Now I'd like to offer a few different techniques that I use for holding space. First one is a visualization technique that I've used many times over the years. When I'm feeling very overwhelmed or trapped by some feeling, sensation, emotion, experience, I get this mental image of being in a big spherical room. And I'm pretty much pressed up against one of the walls. In as much as a spherical room can have walls, I suppose. Because in this spherical room is this enormous balloon that has been blown up to the point that it is filling the entire room. So I'm up against the wall, and there's this balloon pretty much pressing me into that wall. So there's this real feeling of being trapped, kind of suffocated. A pretty classic fear for those of us with a history of panic. And I notice that as I struggle against this balloon, well, it kind of does what a balloon does. You know, you push in on one part and another part just pops out. You know, the parts around it pop out. And so as I push against it, all the parts around the points that I'm pushing on in response pop out into me, making things worse. And then at some point, I realize, well, I'm still here. Clearly, I'm not suffocating. If I stop fighting against this thing, what's it actually feel like? And I get this mental image of just holding my arms out and just touching, lightly touching the balloon. What is this? seeing what it's actually like when I allow it to simply be what it is. The balloon has no volition. It has no intention. It's just there. Of the two of us, I'm the only one who has volition and intention. So, how do I want to exercise those? What is the best option available to me at the time? I can fight this thing, which makes it worse, or I can check it out. And I just visualize. Slowly, gently, feeling around this thing. Now, as I offer these next few techniques, I'd like you to keep in mind a reframing that you may find helpful. Rather than thinking of it as holding space for pain or holding space for discomfort, again, physical, psychological, what have you, think about shifting attention to and holding space for our resistance to it. Because that's where our suffering's really coming from, isn't it? There's pain and there's suffering. Pain we don't have a choice about. Suffering, that comes from not dealing with the pain skillfully, appropriately. So maybe instead of focusing so much on the pain or the discomfort, again, obviously we're not talking about the kinds of pain and discomfort that signal a safety issue, which of course should be addressed. I'm not talking about those. But instead of focusing so much on the pain or discomfort, we look at what we're bringing to it. How we're perhaps resisting. Not even trying to stop the resisting, just noticing it. We don't want to resist the resistance, right? That's not going to work either. just watching the process. So how can we do that? Well, we can look at where our energy is being drawn. I mean this very literally. If you feel some energetic sensation in the body, a tingling, nervous stomach, increased heart rate, things that are open to interpretation, by the way, because the same things that happen in our body during fear and panic are the same sorts of things that happen when we're angry or when we're happily excited. Similar bodily sensations and reactions, very different interpretations. Can we bring attention to the energy, the sensations, the perceptions, and simply hold space for them exactly as they are? Just like with the breathing. A non-judgmental awareness. And we may find physical manifestations of our resistance. And simply bringing attention to them, sometimes for the very first time, simply bringing attention to them right now is enough. If you come up against something that you find is too painful, too overwhelming, too scary, this is not a militant practice. If you have a background with trauma and you're starting to approach something in that realm, this is not the kind of practice where we say, no, you stick with that till you get through it. No. You be good to yourself. You need to take a break. You need to step back. You just come back to the breathing. If that's too much, you stop practicing. There's an old saying that the only way out is through. Yeah. I like to add, yeah, but you don't have to do it all at once. Now, if you have found a particular body part, like we were talking about before, where there's perhaps some actual physical pain or discomfort, or perhaps some physical manifestation of a psychological pain, discomfort. If there's a particular area that you can identify where you feel that in the body, can you let it be as it is, but also, kind of like with the balloon, soften around it or gently lean into it just a little. Just a little. Because we end up in this all or nothing mindset with pain and discomfort. It's here, it needs to be gone. Like a light switch. There's on and there's off. It's here or it's not. That doesn't really work well. Not in my experience. The willingness to ease a little bit, that's much more approachable. And maybe sets the stage to ease a little more at some point. Another one of the mental images I get a lot is that of when we are holding our psychological weapons and our defenses. And sometimes we might say, oh, I wish I could just drop my weapons, right? We don't want to, but we do want to. And there's a fear there that, okay, if I let go of my defenses, I'll never get them back. Well, okay. So maybe don't drop them. But can you ease? Can you gently loosen the white-knuckled grip that you have on them for a minute? Just to see. And the last technique that I'll offer starts getting into the real psychological aspects, again, regardless of whether it's a psychological or physical pain or discomfort, is the storylines that we build around it. Again, this is where the fear in the future, the storylines that we spin for ourselves in an attempt to try to reassure ourselves that we'll be safe, we'll be okay. All those worst case scenarios that we picture in an attempt to be prepared. We bring attention to that process of those storylines being written. Who's writing them? Well, we are, obviously. I mean, it feels automatic because we've gotten so damn good at it. It just seems to happen on its own. And we don't get to choose what comes into the mind. But there is a choice there of what we do with it. When a mental image is presented to us from the mind, beyond our control, there are options on the table. We can take that mental image and start spinning a storyline so quickly we don't realize we've done it. Or we can bring attention to what has come up and say, oh. And particularly when we first start practicing, By the time we notice it, the storylines have already started. And that's fine. That's out of our control as well. It's too habitual. But we can bring attention to that. And this has a few effects. One is that, well, we can't observe the storylines being written and write them at the same time. We can go back and forth very quickly. It can seem like we're doing both at the same time, but we can't. We don't multitask like that. So it does help to break the process of the storyline being written. We're also not deliberately trying to stop the storyline. It just happens automatically when we bring attention to it. So what does this mean? Well, it means we're allowing it to be there. By allowing it to be there and looking at it, ironically, it stops. I had a dream once about 15 years ago. I was in a roller coaster. I was in the very first car. There was no one else around. And it was going impossibly high up into the sky, and it was reaching the peak. And I knew it was about to go down, and it was not going to be good. And I was looking all around and freaking out. And at this point, I'd been practicing mindfulness and insight meditation for probably about 8 or 10 years, and my practice had seeped into my subconscious to the point where in this dream, even though it wasn't a lucid dream, I didn't know I was dreaming, but in this dream, I remembered my practice and said, I have no control over this. Whatever's going to happen here is going to happen. The only thing I can do is come to my breathing and observe it. And in the dream, I closed my eyes and came to my breathing. And the dream immediately ended. Why? Because the dream was a storyline. And I stopped writing it. How? By paying attention. I woke up the next morning blown away. It was such a profoundly clear demonstration of the power of this practice, of stopping our own suffering. So this process of making space, of holding space, it's really not about what we're doing. It's really a lot more about what we're not doing. It's about learning to do less. Just a little less. We can open it up. If you have anything that you'd like to ask or share, any observations from what's happened. Yes, Christine.
Mindfulness and insight, are those two different things when you're talking about meditation? Because there's so much I hear. I used to only hear like meditation, and now everything seems to be mindfulness meditation. But I was more used to guided meditation, which seems more like what you're doing. I like, because my head goes like all over the place, or I fall asleep. So I don't know whether you can address, or whether I'm the only person who just doesn't know.
I absolutely can address, and you are absolutely not the only person.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'll nutshell this. Mindfulness is often equated with just awareness. And that's not entirely wrong, but in the Buddhist sense, in Theravada Buddhism, what I study the most, which is really the historical teachings of the historical Buddha from 2,500 years ago, as best we know them, as they've been passed down across, space and time. What the Buddha meant with mindfulness was it was really a function of memory. Mindfulness was about noticing, okay, what am I doing? How's it working out for me? What do I need to change? Because all the Buddha taught was alleviating our own suffering. Again, pain we don't have a choice about. Suffering comes up when we don't deal with pain skillfully. So how am I dealing with things? What did I do? How did it work? And then keeping that in mind as we go about our lives so that we continue to ease and eventually eliminate our own suffering. It's a function of memory and really noticing, okay, what am I doing? Am I being skillful? Am I doing something? It, again, comes back to consider the alternatives. What are the options on the table? Am I choosing the one that's going to, in the long term, cause me suffering or no? It all ties back to that first walk around the block. Is this ever going to amount to anything? I don't know. But I do know that if I don't do it, I'm not going to get jack shit. So that sort of thing. Insight is clear seeing into reality. And I don't mean this in some, foo-foo way. I mean really just what's actually going on here. For example, if we are using mindfulness to, let's say, be present and pay attention, we begin to see the spinning of the storylines that we're doing that generate so much suffering for us. Those storylines that seem so automatic, when we spend enough time with them, bringing a mindful attention to them, at some point we see what's really happening. And we see, holy shit, I'm doing this. I'm doing this. And in my experience, at that point, you don't need to try to make a change, because now you have seen at an experiential level, not a knowledge level, somebody tells you something and now you know it. An experiential level, you have seen, holy shit, this is what's happening. I see it. I actually see it. And at that point, you don't really need to try to stop because you don't want to do it anymore. Now you have felt the cause and effect. In Buddhism, this is karma, cause and effect. I'm doing this and I'm getting that. I don't want to do that anymore. This sucks. So mindfulness really sets the stage for insight. We don't get to choose our insight, when it's going to happen, what it's going to be. You can't. By definition, it just doesn't work that way. Mindfulness is really setting the conditions for insights to arise. And based on those insights, we come to know very deeply which actions will and will not lead to more suffering. And that is the whole point. That is the only point of this practice. Does that help?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Cheers. Thank you. Lisa, please.
Hi, Ron. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I was thinking about what you said about not waiting for this ideal sort of place. And I also was thinking about what you said about, people with say trauma histories and things like that. And I think that a lot of what our culture currently teaches is that, we go through this process of bringing our miserable selves into a million years of talk therapy. And at the end, we earn, the right to be happy and have some sort of space, internally. I like the idea of being able to get some relief from that suffering while still having a long road of stuff that needs to come out in appropriate ways and with the right people and at the right time without re-traumatizing through talk therapy. And, also talk therapy isn't necessarily a good option financially, ad nauseum for a lot of people. So if you could just maybe speak to like, how can we get some relief now while knowing that we have some work to do in other arenas? And, how can we start to enjoy the benefits of this practice while holding space for the fact that we have a journey still that may take us into other avenues, and that's okay, but we can still start to have a better quality of life, in the now while holding space for that journey, knowing that it's still there, I guess, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. You may, for better or for worse, you may like this answer, you may not like this answer. What you just described is the path of practice. When I first started, I had an enormous journey ahead of me. And I was, by making the choices I made of the best ones I had available, I was slowly gaining some relief. As a concrete example, my agoraphobia grew out of me trying not to experience discomfort. And I found myself at a point where I was so anxious about panic that what I considered to be a comfortable zone shrunk. And the more it shrunk, the more inward I turned in an attempt to maintain whatever comfort I could find. And it became a vicious cycle to the point where the only comfort I could find was in the bedroom of my apartment, and even then, not so much. What I started to learn as I began the practice was I opened to the possibility that I might be able to face some small amount of discomfort. And what I found when I did that was, oh, holy crap. And this is a big insight for me early on in my practice was, holy crap. After I face some kind of actual discomfort, guess what I feel? Comfort. I realized comfort is just that thing that you feel after you've experienced discomfort. And that became motivation to start experiencing a little more discomfort and a little more discomfort and a little more discomfort. And I sit here today, 23 years later, same guy who still has an enormous journey ahead of him, who still experiences all kinds of pain and discomfort, and who still feels comfort after doing something uncomfortable. Everyone's path, or what works on everyone's path, is going to be a little different. And part of what we're doing here is engaging in some trial and error to see what works for each of us. In the same way that the things that brought us ultimately to years of talk therapy or what have you are things that did not happen like a light switch, the undoing of that isn't going to happen like a light switch either. The reason I offered a bunch of different techniques today was because some are going to resonate with some people and some aren't. And we all ultimately are our own teacher, and we have to figure out what works for each of us. In the process of doing that, we will find the things that will start to bring us a little bit of relief. This is where the mindfulness comes in as a function of memory. The Buddha was a scientist. He was very experimental. Cause and effect. I do this and I get that. It's not always that simple, which is why karma is so complex. It's not always just an A to B. It's not linear. But, okay, I'm going to try this and see what I get. Was there discomfort? Maybe. Is there suffering? Maybe, maybe not. And we modify and we try again. We modify that. We try again. We assess. We say, all right, how's this working out for me? This is the practice. This is the practice. Sometimes it's 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. But it is a process of finding what works. And what works at one time may not work at another time and so forth. But yeah, it's a process by which we start to find what works and we stick with that and expand on that as we go through this incredibly long path and we gain relief here and there. Does that help?
Absolutely. I find though a lot of hope in that, and also just the fact that, it seems to resonate. And I think that it's easy to feel like, oh, well, I'm the only person who feels this way. And, I'm just neurotic, get over it. But I think that, the fact that you seem to really understand exactly what I was talking about in and of itself is hopeful. So I feel like, I'm on a good path here. So thank you.
Awesome. Cheers for that. I'll share something from my own current experience, should it help. I've stayed very sheltered in the last 15 months. I've been able to work remotely. Same for my wife. We've been very fortunate. And my thinking was, hey, you know what? I don't have to go out and risk myself and this stuff. So I'm just not going to. And I'm an introvert. I'm perfectly happy to stay at home. It's not entirely functional for me, though, because, again, you think back to my agoraphobic days, it's not really good for me to be that comfortable for that long, because nothing grows in the comfort zone, right? And comfort zones, if they're not growing, they're shrinking. So I know, and I knew when this whole thing started that was going to be a risk for me, was, okay, my comfort zone probably going to shrink, and there's going to be some reckoning on the other side of this. Okay. I, tonight, am going out for my first large, not huge, but sizable social gathering since February of last year. I'm having a lot of anxiety. My stomach's in knots. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, oh yeah, I meditate and I don't get nervous. Bullshit. I'm the same guy who was trapped in his apartment for 6 months with panic disorder and agoraphobia. I'm still that guy. But I have found ways to work with it such that it doesn't stop my life. And based on previous experience, I have a pretty strong feeling that an hour into the engagement tonight, all of this discomfort is suddenly going to shift into a feeling of comfort and relief. Why? Because I've watched that same process happen day in and day out now for decades. I'm still on the path myself. Cheers. Yes, Scott. Hi.
Thanks, Ron. I guess the question I have is when you said, finding out what works for you. And one of the problems I have, and I'm relatively new to this, but let's say I'm trying to just concentrate on my breathing and it's 15, 20 minutes and I'm still having all these intrusive thoughts and I'm feeling to myself, this isn't going anywhere, And I'm just wondering, your thoughts on this because, one thing you said is consider the alternative. Well, the alternative is just to stop. But in the meantime, I'm very impatient with myself and feeling sort of like a failure at this. So any advice you have?
Tons. You do have other options on the table. It's always funny when people ask this question. I've noticed time and time again, when people ask this question, it's very common to use the word intrusive. I've also had people talk about it with sound and intrusive sound. My first question is always, what's intrusive? So I've been practicing yoga for a number of years, and in the studio I used to go to, there was a radio in the room. I used to show up like about a half hour early just to, kind of pick my spot and sit down for a while and have do a little seated meditation on my own before class started. And so I was very often the first person in there. And they had a radio in there that was, going through the loudspeaker or whatever. One particular day I go in there and the radio's pretty damn loud. Like someone left it on just accidentally too loud. I was like, all right. And I go and I sit down and I go about my practice and I'm sitting with what's there. I'm sitting with my breathing. I'm sitting with my thoughts. I'm sitting with the sound. It's typical practice. About 10 minutes pass and the yoga teacher, I'm still the only one in there. yoga teacher comes walking in to start prepping the room. And, we knew each other well at this point. And he was like, "Oh, Ron, I'm so sorry. I had no idea that the radio was on so loud. How are you practicing in spite of this?" And I said, "I'm not practicing in spite of it. I'm practicing with it." One person's intrusive sound is another person's delight. Intrusive is something that we're bringing, not something that the thing is bringing. A thought is a thought. And in this mind, which is built to think and has billions of neurons doing all kinds of happy horseshit every second, yeah, thoughts are going to happen. And if we come to this with the mindset of, well, that shouldn't be happening. Well, first off, that's a thought. So too late. And second off, good luck with that. So the first thing is, okay, why am I considering this intrusive? And the impatience. Yeah, interesting. That's something to sit with, isn't it? That's something to just kind of hold some space for. Well, what the hell is this? I had someone ask me at one of these, I have difficulties doing a sitting practice because I feel like, well, when I sit, I keep thinking about all these things I need to get done, and I'm not being productive by just sitting here. And I said, well, yeah, but you could go get those things done, but you're probably going to get those done anyway. It seems to me you can't really do anything much more productive for yourself long term than to sit here and see why you have so much trouble just sitting here. Because if you can't just sit with yourself for 20 minutes, that's a big red flag. One other example I like to give is that of boredom. We hate boredom, right? But I say, boredom is not boring. Look at all the shit that comes up around boredom. We'll do anything not to feel bored. It can be an amazing thing to sit with. And looking at the feelings and the sensations and the angst that comes up, not specifically around a feeling of boredom, a feeling of impatience, but around the interpretations. Oh, this is intrusive. Oh, really? Well, I guess if you say it is, huh? And what kind of experience are you having from that? Because we're not passive recipients of our experience. Something comes up, we react and respond to it in a certain way, and that shapes what comes next, right? And then it just snowballs from there. So we kind of want to, again, bring that mindfulness, bring that attention, so we can gain that insight and see, oh, what am I bringing to this process that is so damn habitual at this point, I had no idea I was even doing it. And that's when we can begin to unravel some of this stuff.
Thank you.
Cheers. I will wrap it up there. If there's anything that comes to mind, you want to drop me a line, feel free. And I hope to see you all again real soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you, Ron.
so much.
Thank you.
Ron.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
See you again.
Thank you.
That's great.